Okay, it's Amy from Two Oaks Farmstead back with you to give you some really great tips on baking the perfect chocolate chip cookies. Okay, now I'm known for my baking, but I'm really known for my cookies. My chocolate chip cookies, they are always requested by family, and then I also sell them when I do sell an order of chocolate chip cookies. I always get return visitors. So these are really good. And I've spent a lot of time working out what the best way is to bake them. Now, there's some very basic cookie recipes out there for the dough. And for instance, there is the very basic Nestle Toll House chocolate chip cookie recipe. And I like to tweak. I like to go through and find out which way is best, what ingredients make things absolutely perfect. And I've worked out this cookie recipe over years, and I believe I've perfected it. So I wanted to show you what I do and give you a kind of a few tips here as far as how I do this. Now, your basic process is by putting your dry ingredients together and your wet ingredients together. You mix them and then you add them together and get them going. Now, the reason I'm doing this right now, we've got a little thing going on in the household here. Our church is doing a Christmas production, and I was trying to talk one of my kids, my 14-year-old son, into being the narrator for this production. He was really not having it, but it ended up, I'm not sure if I bribed him or if he blackmailed me, but the way it's working out is he's doing it and I'm supplying him with cookies. I guess throughout the process, I'll find out. But okay, so here we are, and the way that we're going to get started, I've got my flour already put into my dry ingredients bowl. Now, I will say this, I never make a single batch of anything. There's just no sense in it. It's wasted time. I make a double batch at minimum on everything. Got a big family, and everyone in my family has big sweet teeth. So we're starting out with a double recipe. And in a normal recipe, it's a 2 1/4 cup of flour. So we're doing 4 1/2 cups. Now, that brings me to the very first trick that you should know about these cookies. What it calls for, a basic recipe calls for, in a doubled recipe, it calls for 2 teaspoons of baking soda. I really don't like that. It never works out for me. I get indigestion. It's just not a good cookie. In my opinion, half and half of baking soda and baking powder works best. So in a double recipe, it's 2 teaspoons. So I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of each. So there's the baking soda. And there's the baking powder. So there's that. Now, the salt. In a double recipe, it requires 2 teaspoons of salt. I use sea salt when I can. I mean, I'm not above using table salt if I need to. But since I have the sea salt on hand, that's what I'm going to use. Okay, so 2 teaspoons of sea salt. Now I'm going to grab a whisk and give that a quick mix so that it is ready. And now I'm going to get on to my wet ingredients. Now I'm going to start by telling you that in a doubled recipe, it requires a full 2 cups of softened butter. I am actually this is where another one of my tweaks is coming in. I'm going to do 1 cup of softened butter, and I'm going to do 1 cup of Crisco, or whatever brand. It doesn't matter. Shortening. You want to do a cup of shortening and a cup of softened butter. I'm going to go ahead and get this. This is really hard butter. Oh, and by the way, it's unsalted. Remember that. It is unsalted butter. That's what you want to use. So I'm going to get this in the microwave for a few seconds and let it soften. Meanwhile, I have already, I guess, measured out my shortening, and I'm going to get it into my mixing bowl real quick. A little small spatula really comes in handy for things like this. Okay, so I've got that. Now I already have my sugars measured out as well. Okay, that's good. So butter is softened, not melted, and I'm going to go ahead and get it into the bowl. Now my sugars, in a double batch, it is 1.5 cups of white sugar and 1.5 cups of brown sugar packed. Now I'm going to make this point really quick. I thought everyone knew this, but I came to learn recently that some of the younger ladies who are learning to bake don't know this. When you measure brown sugar, you smash it into your measuring cup. That's called packed brown sugar. So you smash it in there hard as can be, and then you dump it out of your measuring cup. So I have the brown sugar that I'm adding and the granulated sugar. And so that is in there. And then I'm going to add my eggs. Now in a doubled recipe, this requires 4 eggs. I'm going to get this on here. Some people will put their eggs in while they're beating it one at a time, but in this kind of a recipe, I've never found that to be necessary. I just go ahead and throw all my eggs in there at one time and compost the shells. Woo! Good thing I cleaned my counters. Okay, so all of those are in there, and I'm going to go ahead and get this started beating. I'm a messy cook. If you've watched any of my cooking videos, I am a really messy cook, so this is a very normal thing for me to have. And I'm going to go ahead and give you the next thing that I'm putting in is my additional tip. It requires vanilla. It asks for in a doubled recipe, it's 2 teaspoons of regular vanilla. I like Mexican vanilla. We all really, really love the Mexican vanilla. Stronger, has a bit of a zing to it, and I add just a smidge more than what it calls for because we just like it so much. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my Mexican vanilla. So it'll be 2 teaspoons and a smidge. There's the 2, and I'll give it a little extra. Trust me, it's awesome. All right, we finished mixing that up. So now the next step is to add the dry ingredients, like a cup or so at a time, into the wet ingredients and mix them together. Now, I mentioned that I'm a messy cook. As soon as I start doing this, it's going to be everywhere. Flour just puffs out up here, and it just becomes caked. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and mix this up, and then I'm going to put the dough. I'm going to mix in the chocolate chips by hand. I'm going to, with a spatula, mix them in by hand, and then I'm going to set this in the fridge. I want it to chill for at least a couple hours. Then I'm going to come back in a little bit later and I'm going to show you what we do to get them on the pan and into the oven and give you a couple more tips. Okay, so I wanted to show you this real quick before I get it into the fridge. My batter, my dough, is all mixed up and yummy. I taste tested. And I'm going to now add the chocolate chips. Now the recipe, I think it calls for a couple of cups or whatever. I never pay attention to that. I put in however many I feel is necessary for really good coverage. So, and I mix it with a spatula. I don't mix it in the mixer unless I'm really pressed for time. I was throwing everything together. I like to mix it with a spatula, get it all the way through. Plus in the mixer, the beater doesn't always go down to the bottom. So sometimes you miss a lot there. And with a spatula, you can do that by hand. Make sure that everything has plenty of chocolate chips, which is the point here. So we've got some pretty good coverage. So I'm going to add just a touch more. Okay, all of them. And I like a lot of chocolate chips. It's just better that way. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is cover this and stick it in the fridge for at least a couple of hours and let it get good and chilled. If the dough is chilled before you cook it, then it holds up better. Instead of just all of a sudden melting into a teeny tiny little flat cookie, it tends to hold its form better. Now I am going to do that, and then I will get back with you when I pull it out of the fridge, and I'm going to give you those other tips. Okay, so now I'm back and my cookie dough has been thoroughly chilled, and I've got my cookie sheets, or a couple of them anyways, greased, and I've got my oven set to 350. Now it calls for cooking them at 375. I don't do that. I cook them a little bit less, and I'm going to give you my my trick to cooking the perfect cookie. So I already gave you the tips and tricks on mixing up the dough, but baking the cookies to perfection requires one element. Don't cook them all the way. It's just plain and simple. Don't cook them all the way, because when you take them out of the oven, your cookie sheet is still hot. You're going to set them out, and for at least a minute before you scoop them up and put them on a cooling rack. And the cookie sheet is still hot enough that it can kind of finish off your cookie. The residual heat from it can. Here's my tip. When you take them out of the oven, what you want to see is the middle looks like it's not quite done. It looks a little bit shiny still, like it's not quite done, but the outer edges are starting to look like they're getting done. Maybe a little bit golden. If you've gone to brown, you're already cooking them too far. But I'm going to go ahead and get these going on here. And all I do, some people like to do, roll them up into balls and all that. I'm not that fancy. I just spoon them out. You can just use a little spatula, and I just spoon them out in little clumps and kind of space them out to where they're not going to mush all together when they cook. But you want to make sure that they are all the same size. And it doesn't matter if you make big cookies or little cookies, but you want to make sure that they're all the same size so they all cook evenly throughout. So I will show you what they look like when they come out of the oven. Okay, so I just took the first batch out, and I wanted to show you this. When I took them out, they were almost completely light colored, like almost white. But if you can see this, but they are, you can see around the edges where they're starting to get a little bit golden. And when I took them out, they were still a little shiny. That one right there is still a little shiny. It's been almost a minute since I took them out. Oh, there's a minute. since I took them out, and the heat from the pan has already got them to where they're almost completely perfect. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to use my spatula to take them off, put them on a cooling rack, and I'm going to show you here in just a bit why we do the shortening in here and a couple other quick little things. Okay, I just took the last, I just put the last batch in the oven, so it's just the one more, and I've got the rest out. And I wanted to show you these cookies. I want to show you why I use the shortening along with the butter. The butter is great for the flavor, obviously unsalted butter, but the shortening, adding that to it, makes this thicker cookie. If I just use the butter, it's still a wonderful cookie, but they tend to flatten more, and adding the shortening in there makes this thicker cookie. Now, this is in the first batch. These have already been cooling for a little bit, but I want to show you. I hope you can see this. No, they don't crack at all. They just bend right open. They're completely soft. There's a little bit of a crispy edge, and then the center is perfectly soft. The perfect cookie. Absolutely the perfect cookie. Stick around, come back, hit the subscribe button, notification bell, because you're not going to want to miss what's coming up.